the more you give, the more you get back. I failed as an academic and was lucky enough to be hired by McKinsey. People from very different backgrounds could come together to solve a problem. Anyone can do anything. I had a situation where our chief architect physically attacked me. I don't think you would have been in a professional situation where somebody actually took you by the collar and tried to strangle you by pushing you against the wall. Don't focus on getting all your seats filled, but you stick to saying, jitne bhi aayenge, utne hi lenge. This is like a half MBA. And a half MBA is a no MBA, right? Either you have a 2-year MBA or you don't. What is this 1-year MBA? I have a situation right now live. Here you have sold people a world-class, top-notch MBA program with a beautiful campus, but the campus is not ready. When you watch these matches, right, you ask Jasprit Bumrah, what was he thinking? He's saying, I'm not thinking of the match. I'm thinking of the next ball. You have to completely reinvent the model because how you teach and how you learn online is completely different, and a lot of people don't recognize that.
Just your thoughts on having seen Hyderabad and Delhi, what is the replicable factor?
I think the leadership.
There was a presentation slide which said Asia's best business school, and I think you've accomplished that. Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host Jivraj, and I'm delighted to share that we're now part of the Zerodha Media Network. For today's episode, I have in me a very special gentleman. This person is responsible for changing the landscape of education in terms of higher education in the last 3 decades in India. This is the man behind the Indian School of Business, the man behind Ashoka University, the man behind Vedika Scholars, the man behind Naropa Fellowship, and many more incredible initiatives, including what he's currently doing with Harappa and Upgrade. Thank you so much, Mr. Pramath, to join me. I'm really glad and really honored to be hosting you today.
Thank you, Jivraj. That was a very kind introduction. I'm not the man behind changing any landscape.
No, I think you've always maintained how humble you are, but it's just incredible in terms of what you've done over the years. And what I find most fulfilling is how many lives you've ended up touching, and foundationally so. And I feel that's the theme I want to capture over the next 1 hour of talking to you. Where I want to start, sir, is knowing how your multidisciplinary background has helped you shape educational institutions in fields that you perhaps may not have firsthand studied, however, have contributed to in a meaningful manner. To give some context to those who may not be unfortunately familiar, you had this IIT education at a time when IITs and still continue to be the premier institutions in the country. Then you went on to do a PhD. Then you went on to do consulting. All very, very multidisciplinary backgrounds. But then you ended up starting a business school and a liberal arts education and online education in multiple different fields. Talk to us about how the dots connect in your head and how did that contribute to what you currently do?
Yeah, I've never been asked that question, so it's an interesting observation. What you said is absolutely true. At some level, the formal education I got was very focused, and it was all engineering.
Yeah.
But yes, the institutions I've set up, whether it is in business or liberal arts, one in design, are all fields that I've not studied. Mm. I think this comes from perhaps my school, where I was taught by American Jesuits, and it wasn't called liberal arts, but I think they really encouraged us to study all subjects. Maybe it was also an era where this craze for STEM or engineering was not already prevalent in the school that I went to. So there was a lot of emphasis on literature and language and history and geography and so on. So while this obsession with IIT and engineering had started to creep in, I think we were still untouched a bit in my generation. But then, yes, the IIT education really narrowed things down. And I think the fact that those 4 years I had to study something that I was not interested in as a subject, it didn't strike me then, but later on in life, I realized that I had done 4 years of something that I was not using at all. And in fact, was not the best time in terms of engagement with a topic. Then I think the Penn PhD, doing a very hardcore engineering PhD in a very liberal arts setting, and seeing the intersectionality of my subjects or the interdisciplinary nature of inherently of the problems that I was solving. That became a very core aspect of the education I got and the significance that I saw in building a future in careers. That interdisciplinarity and doing things at the intersection of disciplines is going to be very important in the future. Is something that I started to realize there. And then I failed as an academic, as I like to say, because I did my PhD, became an academic, and couldn't really cut it, didn't enjoy it, and was lucky enough to be hired by McKinsey. And that was a big part of the education again, to see that people from very different backgrounds could come together to solve a problem, and a real problem. Yeah. It didn't matter what you had studied. So this notion that, and this sounds a bit bombastic, but that anyone can do anything, started to sink in, partly because I was living it, but partly because I saw people around me living it. And the fact that a human being's true potential is just immense. There is no limit to it. And I like to say that, listen, it's not about saying that some motivational speech. It's just that you can't do everything, but you can do a lot. And for that, it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer or a MBA or a history major or a BDes in communication design. You can actually all do the same work. You can all solve the same problems. You can all come together, which is even better, to solve a problem. And so that has really been the underlying principle behind some of these. On the face of it, they may seem like a business school, a liberal arts institution, but it's also just, each of these are very, very interdisciplinary in their approach. Each of these are very much about developing people's full potential. Each of these are very much about having teachers who inspire you to believe in yourself, regardless of what you're studying. So that has really been the underlying theme that I would say has driven a lot of what I've created.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think it's commendable how some of those are foundational to just human transformation as well. And you've seen multiple such stories now. But I guess the foundation being similar across the board is something that truly stands out. In fact, that begs the question. And when I was observing your career trajectory, it just felt in amongst the education landscape, perhaps K-12 is the only one you've not directly touched. And from what I realized, you were on boards of a couple of schools, but let's say not directly involved. And it also feels like K-12 is foundational in what you end up doing later in your life. Any thoughts from your observations, or is there a stint coming on that landscape from your end? But how can we instill some of these principles that you highly speak about, which is curiosity, problem solving, critical thinking, ability to take risk, ability to choose what you want to study? Can that in some systemic way be also introduced in the K-12 segment? And what would that mean for higher education? A lot of IB schools are, of course, cropping up. That's, of course, a change that we're seeing. But what is your thought on the K-12 segment in general?
So I know too little to be dangerous, as they say. And I'm not trying to be humble about this. I really do think that education is a very complex profession, and you need to be a professional and an expert to make comments on what needs to change. My impression is that the answers are already there. I mean, you mentioned the IB curriculum. Yeah. That's how you do it. I think you free up the curriculum from a very constrained system, which is where we've ended up. Look, when I was studying English, we used to do 2 Shakespearean plays in class 9 and class 10. Now, you may say, what relevance does it have? And I agree. I mean, maybe we didn't need to do Shakespearean plays. We could have done plays by Indian writers or translations. But the point is that we had to study and interpret very esoteric stuff and try to understand this. And it challenged your thinking. It challenged your ability to interpret, connect it to your world, write, communicate, answer essay type questions. All of that has gone out of the window as the numbers have grown, and our ability to assess people at that mass scale has come in the way just because we feel like we can't correct so many answer papers. We've said, okay, let's make it simpler, 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 or let's make it more choice based or multiple choice question based or short answer based. So the whole critical thinking, reading, writing, interpretation element has just suffered and gone out of the window. So I think in the scaling up of education, we have lost out on a lot of these nuanced aspects of what should be there at the K-12 level. And that's why you see now alternative methods, alternative schools becoming very popular. Unfortunately, that is still very elite and niche and expensive. So most of our folks are getting affected by this simplification or standardization. I do think there's another problem, and that is this obsession with entrance tests. Because even if you did have in the school a curriculum that encourages some of these aspects, the problem is that now at class 7 and class 8, you start streaming people into coaching.
Correct.
That further restricts your ability to explore and to be curious and to develop some of the holistic skills. I think that is also a big, even if you changed, say, the ICSE or CBSE or state board curricula, the new education policy talks about all of this. Suppose you were able to change. If the obsession with getting into these going through these institutes and getting coaching to get a good rank continues, then you're basically killing whatever education you are getting in school. And I think both these things have combined. So I think to make a radical point, I think you just need to get rid of these entrance tests. And I know that it's easier said than done. And you need to really look at opening up the school curriculum. And finally, I think the government and many people are working on this whole kind of concept of foundational learning and numeracy, right? FLN or Nipun Bharat, which is being worked on. I think if you don't develop language and numeracy skills at an early age, then you kill for the entire future a person's ability to learn and develop again those faculties that we were talking about.
Got it. No, I think those are very, very helpful thoughts, and hopefully some of those will change in the future. I think a lot of these, media things, developing an entrepreneurial passion for the country is encouraging students to also take the leap of faith and risk formal education vis-a-vis unconventional pathways. So I think that's lovely, and hopefully podcasts like these can help further. But coming back to perhaps the trail that I was really fascinated by. So one thing was the multidisciplinary nature of what you went through, but the other very evident and perhaps unspoken of thing at the time was the fact that you ended up taking a lot of risks, at least in hindsight, or perhaps go into these uncertain pathways, right? For an engineering student who didn't want to continue with academia, you ended up pursuing a PhD. For a PhD, you ended up becoming a consultant. For a consultant, you ended up becoming a dean. And you've spoken about these pivotal moments where somebody else saw in you something that you didn't perhaps. Yet the dichotomy is in knowing that, a lot of us also talk about this focus, compounding, knowing what you want to do, passion, and a bunch of other things. However, in your trajectory, the fact that you stood true to the present at that point and just took the best decision is a very interesting one. Can you talk through maybe some of those crucial decisions in your life? What played in your head? And how did you gather the courage, for the lack of a better word, to take a diametrically opposite pathway and look how it turned out for you?
Yeah, I think people talk about the positive successes, but with the positive successes, you have to also combine the failures.
Yeah, please.
Because that's when you can see the full picture.
Absolutely.
So the truth is that I have found that it's not like I don't agonize and think about an opportunity or a switch as anyone does. But I've also found that maybe my judgment is all off. But every time I've done a lot of thinking, I've ended up in a situation and realized that I took a long call. It's not universally always true, but there are calls where you took where you worked very hard at it, you really thought it through, and then once you got there, you realized, oops, I've made a mistake. But a lot of my successes have come post those failures, because post a failure, you become a little bit more open. You don't overthink things and you're a little bit desperate. So you say, now what do I do? So a new opportunity comes your way, you're much more open. You say, maybe I should try that out, right? Because I thought a lot about something. I thought I had got it right and I didn't. So what's the downside of trying something out? You are slightly more willing to take a risk, like you said. So I think a lot of times, then what happens is then you listen to people also. You'll ask people for more advice. Not that you otherwise don't ask people for advice, but you're much more open. And when somebody says, you know what, you may not want to do this, but I can tell you this is the right thing for you. You rely on that person a little bit more because you don't trust your own judgment. Now, in those situations, I think just being more open has yielded opportunities for me that, you can call it luck, you can call it destiny, you can call it serendipity, being in the right place, right time. Those opportunities have really worked out, right? I was very reluctant to do ISB. I thought Rajat Gupta, who convinced me to join the project, was being a bit cute with me to say, listen, because you don't have an MBA, do this, right? Or even when I wanted to be ISB Dean, when I was made ISB, I was not supposed to be made ISB Dean. I took it up partly because it seemed exciting, right? Fun thing to do. I was consulting. I was a little bored about. So I think whenever you've gone with a little bit of emotion, a little bit of nudge from others, I think things have worked out. And I think that is the big lesson for me, that you can sometimes overthink things. And sometimes you just go with the flow and good things can happen. I think people need to realize that for all the successes you see, there are all these missteps when you take lessons from somebody's career. And it's a combination of the missteps and successes that really give you the insight as to how decisions were made and what you should do next. So I think I trust my instincts a lot more. I trust other people's instincts a lot more. I'm always looking for opportunities rather than saying, no, I know exactly what I want and I'm only going to go after that. I encourage young people to be much more open to opportunities. First, pehle sun to lo, uske baad na karna, right? Give yourself the chance to experience. You are actually privileged that you have choices, that you have multiple opportunities that are being brought to your attention. Give it all a chance, and then sometimes let the opportunity choose you rather than you deciding when you are really agonizing about something. So all those things actually combine to help you take decisions over multiple choices in your life, I think.
I love that. I think what I'm hearing is the fact that there were missteps along the way made you also more willing to take some of these steps and figure out, because some might hit as they say, you have to make your luck. And I think a bunch of those decisions have played out so beautifully well. I want to come to one of them, which was the ISB decision of you becoming the founding dean. And I think Rajat Gupta, who's your close mentor, and we all know about, has gone on record to say that the best gift I've given to ISB is Pramath Raj Sinha. If you can talk, Pramath, about the complexity of setting up a world-class institution that impacts lives. Because there were a bunch of things. This project happened over 5-6 years and more. You got a lot of foundational things right. There was a large gestation period. You've spoken about how different stakeholders you had to coordinate with. And then there was, on top of it, the crisis, right? Like not having a dean at the last moment and you stepping up. So a lot of this in the moment feels like, for something that's never been done before, a very, very sharp for the lack of, again, better phrasing. If you can talk to us about, how it all came together to being, I would love to hear your learnings and just revisit some of those perhaps anecdotes.
Yeah, this podcast could go on for hours. I do think again that what you see is the overall success
Sure.
and the things that worked. There were at least an equal number of things that didn't work in that journey. But first, a few key insights that have really made a difference. One is that if you're building something like an educational institution, then be very clear about the quality level that you're aiming for from day one. And I've said this before, then once you aim for a certain level, go for that from day one. If you want to build a first-rate institution, the tendency can be in usual traditional thinking that, listen, I can never be first-rate from day one. So let me start at third-rate, and then I'll go to second-rate, and then I'll go to first-rate. In education, you will never get there, at least not in anybody's lifetime, because you'll always be third-rate, and then getting it to second-rate will take decades, and then to first-rate. So if you have a chance in hell of making a first-rate or even a second-rate, you better start at first-rate and second-rate. Don't make the mistake of starting lower, thinking you'll reach there one day. Now, that takes some doing, because then you have to be uncompromising. For example, as a new institution, getting great faculty will be difficult. As a new institution, getting great students will be difficult. And you will have the tendency to say, okay, let me get whoever I can get. But then you are getting B grade, C grade faculty, B grade, C grade students, and you can compromise. Then you'll again get stuck. So how do you constantly make sure that you don't focus on getting all your seats filled, all your slots filled, but you stick to saying, jitne bhi aayenge utne hi lenge, lekin we'll take only that quality. So this has manifested itself in all the projects that I've ever done. And even today, I get beaten up when I'm helping build a new B school somewhere. The person who was leading the effort projected that we'll get 60 students. The truth is that we got 10. In another case where we are building a new institution, we were going to get 120, we've got 30. But you know what? I'm really happy, because I can see that those 10 and those 30 are that level. So I know that we are now in business. ये तो चल पड़ेगा, right? Others are very worried कि अरे यार, मतलब हमने तो मेरी तो नाक कट गई. We had promised 120. You were saying कि 30 में शुरू कर दो, बंद कर दें क्या? I said नहीं, absolutely चलाओ, because I've got those 30. And give those 30 a great experience. Now I've built my principle of saying I've created that quality. Right? So that's one very important thing. The second thing is that one of the things I learned very early on, and Rajat taught me this, that you really have, when you're building projects like this, particularly if you're building an institution for the future, it can't be one person's institution. So how do you create a shared governance, a collective ownership model from day one? Now, we are all entrepreneurs. We love to own things, right? I can say कि ये रजत गुप्ता की स्कूल है, या ये प्रमथ सिन्हा की स्कूल है, या ये आशीष धवन की स्कूल है. That's the, you can, but the struggle is even more. It's much easier if you say that this is nobody's school, this is everybody's school, right? Including the first batch of students that come in. I've always maintained that the founding batch of students are the biggest stakeholders in any institution. Look, they are taking the biggest risks. The founding faculty are big stakeholders. These are people who could get jobs anywhere, but they're joining a new institution to help you build something. They are as important as the founders. So again, creating that collective ownership of projects, I think, makes those projects that much more successful. And it's actually a smart strategy, because if I get hit by a truck tomorrow, there's many other people who can take the project forward, and they feel as passionately about it. I think the third is that you always have to look for something new, something different, something alag. When we built ISB, it was the 963rd MBA program in the country. And a lot of people said, "Ki yaar, ek aur MBA, matlab, wasting your time. Come on, boring, right?" But we were pushing ourselves to say, how will this be different? Same thing with Ashoka, the Young India Fellowship Program. Every time, and I'm not saying it's just me, everybody who's been involved in these have been really fired up about the idea of doing something that is different, that is distinctive. I remember early on in ISB, we wrote a note which said, why is ISB distinctive? Why? And we had 3 points in true sort of McKinsey consulting style, right? So I think it was very important always to say educational institutions are a dime a dozen in the world. And it's not then just about quality. It's one thing to say I have a better quality institution than yours. But what is so unique about what you are offering? So these are some of the principles and some of the learnings that I had. And these were not easy. So even in the case of ISB, settling on the 1-year MBA program, which was very new for India in those days, was a very courageous decision. In fact, employers often would say, this is like a half MBA. And a half MBA is a no MBA, right? Either you have a 2-year MBA or you don't. What is this 1-year MBA? And then we would say that, no, not only is it a 1-year MBA, but by the way, these are experienced people who should not get the same entry-level jobs that you give to people who are directly out of college and got an MBA from IIM. And they would look at us and say, are you nuts? I mean, so what if they worked in a software company? What will they do in my FMCG company? Even McKinsey, my employer at that time, and the firm behind the project would say that, but Pramath, these guys are not as smart as those IIM guys, right? Because they were getting really intelligent, grade-wise and marks-wise sharp folks out of the IIMs. But here there was a different card. So getting people to appreciate the value of distinctiveness is also not easy, because by definition it is different. So people are not convinced that that is the right thing for them in terms of recruitment or hiring and so on. So those were some of the lessons. I think regulatorily, these are all big challenges, because education is regulated everywhere in the world. There's a huge aspect of regulation in our country and accreditation. We have multiple levels of regulation. There is state level regulation, there's national level regulation, there are accreditation bodies. Within each discipline, the Bar Council accredits law schools, the Architecture Council accredits architecture schools, AICT accredits MBA program. So there's a plethora of regulators, governments, accreditors that you have to deal with. This is just the education part, but then you have to deal with people who you acquire land from. Then, in ISB's case, they filed PILs against us because they said that the state government has given you land at a concessional rate. That's not in public interest. So you start doing things that have nothing to do with the core education. And of course, there is the core aspect of hiring faculty, building a team, getting the infrastructure up and running. I'm just dealing with a situation that happens every year somewhere or the other in an institution where construction is delayed. Now, most construction projects in the world are delayed, not just in India. But people don't realize that, you've given a date for a semester to start. And students are going to come in from all over the country, and parents have bought air tickets, train tickets. Now, you can't say that, oh, my hostel is not ready. Can you come in 2 weeks? I have a situation right now live where we are saying, listen, please come. Our hostel is not ready, but there's a fantastic resort with swimming pool and beautiful gardens. And can you stay there for 2 weeks? And students and parents are up in arms. They're like, how can you do this to us? So all those issues, in ISB, we had to put the students up in the Taj Hotel. And that time, the The hotels were so far from where we were in Gachibowli. Today, there are many hotels around us. In those days, people had to be bussed every day from the Taj Krishna, which was a good half an hour, 45 minutes away. And it seemed like a very extravagant and a wasteful thing to do. But what choice did we have? Here, you have sold people a world class, top notch MBA program with a beautiful campus, but the campus is not ready. So those are, I mean, I can go on with a litany of these challenges, but in the end, I think we had a really passionate team. We worked night and day to literally get the place up and running, and I think that's the fun part about building institutions.
Yeah. No, it seems so fascinating. I could hear you all day to just understand the different moving parts and the complexities involved in pulling something like this off. But kudos to you and the team, as you mentioned. I think, if I'm not wrong, there was a presentation slide which said Asia's best business school, and I think you've accomplished that faster than later. And it's commendable what it's done to the country and its education. ISB now gets compared to the topmost, and it is one of the topmost colleges in MBA in the world.
Thank you.
I want to understand, also the people's aspect of the entire moving chain, right? This is something you mentioned that McKinsey really taught you the value of people and really caring about them, really holding them to high value, and this is transcended to your career, meaning there's been a public and private side of the entire table that you've had to get in terms of collaboration. You've worked with chief ministers at the time to get stuff done. You worked with so many private stakeholders to get stuff done. Talk to us about some of these people things. How do you manage it, like just stakeholder management? What has that side of the business really taught you?
So you're right. I think in all of these, multiple stakeholders are involved. I think somebody often calls me the master manipulator. But I do think that what has really helped is really being able to build trust. And I think a lot of the trust comes from being very honest, being very transparent, especially when stuff is not going as expected.
Yeah.
Like I was giving the example of hostels not being ready. And you can sugarcoat it and you can say, no, it'll be done this way. But just being completely transparent and acknowledging that. So I do think that both in terms of what's going well and typically when things are not going well, because that's when communication and engagement falters and trust breaks. Being honest to say that things are not working out, being honest to admit that I screwed up or we took a bad call, and then involving the stakeholders in the solution to that setback or to that failure has been a big part of being able to carry everybody along. And when you do that, you often get pushback from people around you.
Yeah.
Because people are scared of the reaction.
Yeah.
People are scared of how they will be perceived or that it will have some consequences for them. At least I have learned along the way that it's better to admit failure and be transparent. So I think that's been one big aspect of stakeholder management. I think being a consultant and that too at McKinsey helped me because early on my managers would always push me to have the awkward conversation, the difficult conversation. I'm like a lot of people, I'm a little bit reluctant to, have difficult conversations or offend people or have people, feel bad. So you try to skirt. But they taught me that when it comes to truly confronting a situation, just be direct and open. So I think that has helped in the stakeholder management, dealing with difficult clients, dealing with difficult stakeholders. I think the other is that people have very strong likes and dislikes about certain stakeholders. Like there's a lot of, sometimes people think think lightly of politicians or bureaucrats or regulators or architects, construction managers. And one of the things that I learned early on in life is that you have to ultimately respect the human being behind that professional. You know, you may screw up as a professional, you may be almost incapable as a professional, but there's a human being behind that person, and you have to respect that person. And as long as you can make that connection, then you can get around their lack of capability or their failures, or and really win them over, or even help them, or even get them to perform at another level. So in these projects, you get people with varying levels of capability. However good a job you do of hiring, however good a job if you do of recruiting a top firm or a manager, you get varying levels of politicians, bureaucrats. Some are helpful, some are antagonistic, some are openly unhelpful. But ultimately saying, listen, on the outside, whatever this person is, this person I have to build, I have to still respect this person for the human being they are, I think has always allowed me to engage with people even in the most difficult circumstances. So that I think would be the second thing. And I think then just showing empathy, it's a bit of, it's cliched as a word these days, everybody throws it about, but to me it's really about listening and understanding ki bhai ye ho kya raha hai, right? Why is this person so annoyed with me?
Yeah.
What could be the problem that I'm seeing it this way and this person is seeing a completely different side to this? How do I reconcile it? So I think just being able to zoom out of situations, look at it from almost outside this conversation and say what's going on here and how can I solve it as a problem, rather than saying this person is like this or that or has a problem, has also helped. So I think stakeholder management has been very difficult. And often you are in these exasperating situations where you just are frustrated.
Yeah.
You want to lash out. You want to walk out of a meeting. I had a situation where our chief architect at ISB actually physically attacked me, right? I don't think you would have been in a professional situation where somebody actually took you by the collar and tried to strangle you by pushing you against the wall. So you see all kinds of situations. I had a situation once where somebody wrote to my manager saying, this guy is incompetent, he should be fired. And if you don't fire him, I'm going to fire McKinsey from. So I think you see these situations and you realize that if you're building aspirational projects, there's going to be blood. And so one of the things you have to do is really learn how to manage these stakeholders. And those are some of the principles that I have followed.
That's very fascinating to hear. Thank you so much for sharing. I think what you're saying is just honesty, transparency, respect, empathy. These are all, very core foundational learnings, but difficult to practice together, especially in like tough situations that you've been a part of.
I think when you have a large mission,
it's worth
then you can calm yourself down and say, listen, I'm focused on this big thing rather than this conversation.
This is inconsequential in that, the large scheme of things. But it's really, really commendable, like how you got like Water and Kellogg to partner early on. So many industrialists to, be a part of the same
That
project.
was really the attraction of McKinsey and Rajat. I was a small cog in that big wheel.
Got it. Yeah. But just the foundation, and with, Ashoka as well, right? Like some 150 founding trustees.
Now almost 200 founders, 200 plus founders.
It's
50 trustees. Yeah.
So, I can only laud from outside. Outside in, it looks like such a humongous task, and it could only be so fulfilling to having achieved it. I want to digress a bit, sir, and want to get your quick thoughts on this conundrum that I, as a 25-year-old, face. So, I'm a non-MBA, and I want to understand how some of these elite institutions, perhaps. So I read this essay which talked about how folks who aspire to get into some of these elite institutions are doing this as a way to limit downside, which also limits their upside. They end up settling for more conventional greatness as opposed to becoming outliers. Would you have thoughts around how to navigate this problem statement, because you've been a part of many elite institutions, IT Kanpur, UPenn, built ISB, built Ashoka, and many others. Do you think the system is such that it would attract the cream, but it will also cap your upside in a way, or is that something that the system will take care of itself?
I think the system does take care of itself. There's always going to be a bell curve of performance or outcomes. There are, even if I look at my own classmates across these different cohorts, or I look at any cohort that I was just sitting with a alumnus from the Young India Fellowship founding batch this morning, and we were talking about the 56 people in his class. I think you always see a bell curve. There will be people who will underperform against their potential, and it could be a whole set of circumstances, sometimes unfortunate, sometimes of their own doing. There will be a bunch of people who will settle, though I would say that they may be people who seemingly settle. They may have chosen to contribute in ways that you and I or the general world doesn't see as success, but they may have committed to having a good family or being a good father or playing golf, for all you know. So I think there is a bunch of people who seem to have settled, but within that there are people who have chosen something else which may not be visible to you and me.
Sure.
And then there are others who have truly bucked the trend and have shown that the MBA or their degree was not limiting, and that they went on to make a mark, they stood out. So I think that variability, that range you see everywhere. I think I do understand what you're talking about, though. That somewhere there is a large, in these elite branded institutions, there is now a herd mentality. So a lot of people are just going there for the sake of the name, because it's prestigious, because it's well paid, because it's got a big name. They haven't really thought about why they are doing it. They're doing it because it's the thing to do. And by the way, I went to IIT in a herd mentality too. I know that feeling, that you have to do it, and once you get in, you say, well, now I can't say no. So I think that tendency has gone up. You see that a lot more because the world is much more, in the old days, you didn't know about the top MBA programs or the top programs that people want to go to. Now everybody knows about everything. Right? So I think there is a large number of folks who are running after things without really knowing why they are doing it, because everybody else is doing it. And that tendency, I think, young people, I don't really know what advice to give them other than to say that, listen, at some point, mentors can really make a big difference there, because these are blind spots.
Yeah.
What you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
But having somebody who is committed to you, but at least a little bit arm's length distant from you, to be able to say that, why are you running after this consulting job? Sure, there's nothing wrong with consulting, but do you really want to be a consultant? Why do you want to be a consultant? This is a common craze, right? Any program, anywhere these days, people want to become a consultant. They want to go to McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and so on. And they have no clue what they are getting into. So I do think that there is a tendency there, and that is why people think that people are therefore settling, underperforming. But I think once people go through those programs and they come out on the other side, you'll probably see the same bell curve type outcome.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I think, there are enough outliers in that bell curve, even within those systems.
Yeah.
I was just thinking if it restricts your capability to take risk, because you have this now persona in your head,
Yes.
which means that, you have to do great, but that may not amount to maybe outlier. So that's the distinction I was trying to make, but this definitely helps.
I do think that I'd like to add one more thing. I think a lot of people who can afford to take risks don't take them because of the fact that, hey, I can get into this program.
There's something to lose now.
Yes.
Yeah. And then that may be limiting. But I think if somebody wants to, they will eventually either way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking of this other couple of people who I've had a chance to mentor recently who were good enough to get into a top MBA program. And they've asked me that, what do you think we should do? And I'm still a big fan of the MBA. But at least in these two cases, I said, listen, you don't really need to do an MBA. And it has a bunch of factors. One, they are very interested in a subject. And I think they should nurture that interest. They have developed a track record, interest. And so that's where they need to make a mark and take a step. Second, they can afford to. They are not financially lacking. So I think sometimes in a combination, now I see a lot of profiles like that where people would have chosen to go the MBA route because it's the safer route, which is what you are talking about.
Yeah.
And they could have taken the risk, they couldn't afford. And both these people are now doing amazing work. And I think those two fields that they are in, one is the person I'm thinking is in bioengineering, biotech, the other is in decision sciences. Those fields would benefit from having those professionals, because if they had done MBAs, those fields would have lost out on these professionals. And people need experts, people need technical expertise. The world needs technical expertise.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, it now becomes contextual. And then if you can afford to take the risk and not follow a conventional pathway, perhaps that's the best option for you. Lovely. I think this was an interesting digression. I want to come back to the journey and learnings from it. The next step after the ISB Dean 1 year is Ashoka, which is the monumental chronological sort of progression. If you can talk about, not the vision as much, but perhaps what it meant to really, again, champion this audacious thought that a liberal arts education, which would have no reservation, which would be absolutely meritocratic, which would have great faculty. What did it mean to bring it to light? And how did it play out when it came to, again, aligning different people? What was the response like? I would love to understand that.
So again, this was really a big challenge in stakeholder management.
Yeah.
I really never wanted to do another institution. I thought I was tired after ISB.
Yeah.
And then I also thought that there's so much to do at ISB. Why would I distract myself? And I did have a full business and professional career. But it so happened that two groups of people approached me, and you probably heard the story, and said, we want to set up something. There was only one of those groups that really wanted to set up liberal arts. The other group wanted to do engineering. Yeah. However, at that point, I liked these people. And honestly, it was the only reason why I chose to join them, because they were all people I respected, good friends, contemporaries. And it sounded like a fun thing to do. I was in Delhi, they were all in Delhi. So physically, we were all in the same place. So that's how we got together. And the reason when I got into it, I realized that both of us had the same challenges. See, I had seen from the ISB example the challenges of infrastructure. ISB was supposed to be in IIT Delhi, then in Bombay, then we went all over the country looking for land and finally landed in Hyderabad, and huge problems building the infrastructure, many delays and so on. So I realized that, if two people are going to build infrastructure, might as well combine efforts and, build one campus, then two campuses. And now I knew that regulatorily, while ISB escaped that, we did go through the regulatory challenges and chose not to. I knew that in doing a university, there was no way to avoid regulation. So then managing the regulation was another thing. So pooling efforts made sense. So that was one big thing that happened where the two groups came together. But the next big thing was that the financial crisis hit, and so people were not feeling so rich anymore. And so the question was, will we be able to raise the money? And so we had to pare down our ambition. And there, the good news was that when all of us went back to the drawing board and said, okay, what does paring down the ambition mean, and what is the core of what we want to do? All of us, despite our different backgrounds, were very focused on what is today called a liberal arts education. So that popped out as the core that we could focus on. So that then made us very focused. But I think the next thing that happened was the fact that the frustration that it had taken us so long to get there and we had not made any progress forced us to sit back and say, but can we do something? What can we do? And that led to the real big innovation that I don't think has been talked about as much as the Young India Fellowship, which
Yes.
led to the Ashokas, which was the precursor to the university.
Yeah.
It was like the pilot project.
Yeah.
But the big innovation that happened there was that we took the ISB model, which was a proven model, in terms of 1 year visiting faculty based program, and infused a liberal arts curriculum into it. But the big leapfrog we did and shortcut that we did was that we removed the constraints of creating our own infrastructure. Because the big insight was that students in the postgraduate program really value the quality of the instruction and the teachers. They really don't care if you don't have a great campus because it's 1 year. They've already experienced campus wherever they've gone. And if you have a half decent campus, which is what we did in the Sri Aurobindo Center for Arts and Communication, which is a rented auditorium, and you house them in Katwaria Sarai close by, even though it's not the poshest of places, you provide that residential peer group bonding and great faculty, then magic happens. And that worked. That experiment worked. So for 3 years, that experiment really put us into prominence and into built a lot of trust, which I was talking about before, which then allowed us to, and that was the plan. So that plan worked to then say, once we've proven this, on the back of this, by then we will have the regulatory thing in place, we'll have the campus land, everything in place. And that is where ISB took 5 years from conception to reality. This took much less because we did not wait for the land and infrastructure, and we used that time to launch a program. So that's how Ashoka evolved. And it was very exciting to see that actually ISB could have evolved into a university also.
Yeah.
We have consciously chosen not to do that. But it was the same start in both cases. But in Ashoka's case, you took a big diversion and went on to build a university.
No, I can imagine, and I think so much of perhaps your experience with the first, direction of ISB must have come into use. Almost like we now talk about the second-time founders starting companies in the entrepreneurial world, and that is similar to how you've established two very successful educational institutions, and then gone on to do ventures, in the online world as well, which I want to come to. But sir, I would love to understand that, considering that over the last, let's say 2001, and I'll perhaps only take that window, the last 23 years, you've seen these transformational human lives, right? Human lives transformed across years, and amongst those must be some not so great stories, but some great stories, and then some medium stories, right? I would love to understand if you can perhaps condense from your observation of people, folks who you've seen, let's say, graduate from one class of ISB, one class of YIF, 4 years of Ashoka, as to what these transformational changes really mean. Like, what is it that humans can do to explore their complete potential? How can these institutions really transform them? And for folks who may not have access to these institutions due to XYZ reasons, what is it that they can replicate from these learnings in their own lives?
I think the amazing journeys have all sort of this hero's journey story, right? Which is that people came from very modest backgrounds or seemingly modest backgrounds, right? So in the case of ISB, you have people from the elite institutions and IITs and so on, but you also have people who didn't go to such institutions. They came from nondescript colleges or universities or engineering programs. But we took them because in their jobs they had done something interesting. So for example, I think of one of our students in the first batch who was working as a sales guy for Grindwell Norton, which is a pumps company. I think he had spent 7-8 years there, right? We had somebody who was running the State Bank of India Jalandhar branch.
Interesting.
Right? We had somebody who was working in Dubai, and he still tells the story of he never thought he would make it. And he was the last guy we took in the class. And he did really poorly throughout the year. In fact, he was a bad admit by our standards, and he says that so, but he's probably one of the most successful graduates in terms of, and his story was that, he was not getting a job, and those days I knew Naresh Goyal, who was the CEO of Jet Airways. He happened to be on campus. He hired 6 people. Those 6 people or 5 people really complained that, we didn't come to ISB to go to work at Jet Airways. But each of those 6 people did amazingly well, right? Because they all got really interesting jobs in Jet and really grew. So this guy who ran the loyalty program with Mr. Goyal's wife, and then went on to start his own loyalty card and became extremely successful. So I'm not taking names, and I could, but the truth is that similarly at, why I've seen similar stories of people who came from a very modest background in Orissa or some state that you would not associate with people who have had a great education and gone on to become entrepreneurs or go on to study in top institutions. One of my mentees was this girl who had studied psychology, I think, at Christ, was working with workers in inmates in Tihar jail. Today, she's a full, assistant professor. She comes and teaches at Ashoka. She went on to do a PhD at Columbia University, worked at Johns Hopkins, and so on. So, amazing stories you see of transformation in these journeys. And I think the one thing that really strikes me is that these are folks who really make the most of whatever opportunity is given to them. And at each stage, they treat it as a completely fresh start. They don't allow themselves to be held back because somewhere they're thinking that, I was not good enough. I mean, all of us have the imposter syndrome, as it's called. But I think these folks are really folks who have almost started again. And I can identify with that because you might think that, I had it, with a silver spoon. But the truth is that when I came out of IIT, I was really not very confident academically. And when I got into Penn, even though it's an Ivy League institution, Penn was not such a top institution for engineering. I mean, most of my IIT Kanpur friends would think I'm a lightweight going to Penn to study masters in engineering. But then when I went there, I knew that this was a fresh start. That even though my GPA at IIT was not that great, that I wasn't that stupid either. And at least let me try. Yeah. And if this is indeed a soft school, then maybe I can do better. And that made all the difference because I suddenly started doing well, and then my confidence grew, and I started believing in myself, and then I became interested in my subjects, and then I went on to do a PhD. So I do think that my advice would be that, we have disappointments. I mean, I was disappointed too. I tried to take the CAT exam, didn't get a good score, didn't go to an IIM. I really wanted to do an MBA at that stage. I had a great GMAT score, but no school abroad, good school, would admit me because I didn't have work experience. I thought on the back of my high GMAT score, I would make it, but I didn't. So in a way, I had a setback. I was disappointed. My grades were low, so while I was getting into PhD programs with full scholarship, they were not in the best school. So I took a bit of a risk because I got into Penn through a little bit of a backdoor entry in the sense that one of my professors really pushed me to go there and helped me get in there. But once I got that opportunity, I said, okay, forget all that. I have to make the best of this. So in some ways, I have lived that, and I know that that can make a huge difference because you erase the past, you leave it behind, and you say, this is a no holds barred chance for me to prove myself again. My JEE rank doesn't matter. My grades at IIT don't matter. My department doesn't matter. This is a completely new game. And, a little bit, I'm always reminded of this when you watch these matches, right? You ask Jasprit Bumrah, what was he thinking? He's saying, I'm not thinking of the match. I'm thinking of the next ball, right? So it's a little bit like that. But I think if you can have that mentality about each new thing you're starting, new program, you may not have gotten into your best school that you wanted. You may have settled for, you think you've settled and you really wanted to go to a much better school. You are disappointed. But whatever you've got, if you can be a big frog even in that small pond, if you can be a topper in your class, even if the class is not in the best university, I think people will notice you.
Yeah, and that's a very powerful insight. I think hopefully it instills a lot of like courage in a lot of people who have to restart, and restarts don't necessarily have to be bad. The insight that a lot of successful people gone through these transformations make the most out of their restarts is lovely. I was just trying to understand the common denominator across some of these journeys, and I think that's lovely. Coming to perhaps some of the end parts of the conversation, I would love to understand that with years of experience, years of working with great talent, setting up institutions, now that you go on to this online phase of education, I'm sure there are these patterns in your head, a lot of left brain exercises, and a lot of the next things that you end up doing become for the lack of maybe better phrasing, more thought through, more like forward looking, right? And that's where you end up starting Vedika, you start Harappa, you start the Narupa Fellowship, and you start these multiple things that go on to become institutions by themselves. If you could again perhaps highlight some of these things that structurally you were starting to perhaps do better on day zero, if there were any, and then how you looked at this carrying the online way forward, almost to see a transformation from, let's say, more physical education in class, in person, to what Harappa would mean, and then with the journey at Upgrad now, how was this transformation personally for you, and what were some patterns that you recognized in institution building that you carried forward with Vedika, Harappa, and Narupa?
So Vedika and Narupa were more in the mindset of the traditional learnings that I had. But you're right, I mean, each of these have represented an evolution. Vedika was much more about combining ISB and Ashoka because I realized that liberal arts and management made a lot of sense. Vedika was also driven by some of the focus around what is now widely seen as a deficit in terms of women leaders, which I remember being at the ISB reunion, and many of the women from the first batch were there who I knew personally, and they were all lamenting the fact that the guys in their batch had gone on to do much more, even after they had done the MBA. So I was also the chair of the Welham Girls' School, and I saw how well the Welham alums were doing, even though they were in a women's only environment. So I think as you go through life, you pick up these dots and you connect them and you say, there's an opportunity here. I think the Naropa Fellowship was similar. I got exposed to Ladakh through some other work and realized that there was a massive migration of young people because there were no universities. So how do you bring them back? And so that again, but the thing about these were that these leveraged my learning from the in-person brick and mortar world.
Yeah.
1-year program, visiting faculty, interesting curriculum, get them placed, and then the thing starts going. I do think that all through though, I was realizing that I think being a techie helped. My PhD was in robotics.
Yeah.
So even 30 odd years ago, I had been exposed to, if you will, artificial intelligence or computer intelligence, and robots are essentially artificial humans. So I could see that there is a lot of potential in the digital age, the internet, mobile telephony. And the other was steeped in education, you realize that the scale at which India has to deliver education, you just cannot do unless something radically new happens.
Yeah.
And the only radical new tool or technology or model on the horizon is teaching online.
Yeah.
So I knew that had to come. But I was biding my time because like I said earlier, I always like to do things that are distinctive. I think too many people were already doing what a lot of people are doing. And so I was saying, no, I want to do something different. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? So I combined that with my belief in leadership skills, the same skills that they don't teach you, but you learn. And those are the skills that make you successful in life. And I had become acutely aware of that through my professional career. So how about teaching those skills and doing it online, which was now a difficult problem to solve, because most people think those skills can't be taught. Then to say that they should be taught online was a double, if you will, challenge. But the other learning I had was that the leader behind these is going to be very important. And I, at that point, did not have the energy to really be a startup and put all my effort into it, because there was many things already happening. I had my company 9.9, I had Ashoka, still involved in ISB all through all these years. Where I got lucky was that Shreya Singh, my co-founder at Harappa, had been working with me at that point and for some time. And in her, I saw the potential of somebody who could actually really, put the booster rockets on this idea. So that was one other learning, that, nothing succeeds unless you have a clear person on the hook. And so that model worked very well, because I was very clear that I couldn't have done it myself, even though I had the insight. And that I needed somebody who was in a founder, entrepreneur, startup mindset, who I could then support and guide. So that was the other insight, that, all these projects happened because there was somebody really taking on ownership and driving it, right? And then, of course, all the other things kicked in, that education has to be high quality. I always say education is a bit like surgery, right? You won't get yourself operated on by a mediocre doctor.
Yeah.
So you are affecting people's lives, whether you do a certification program or you do a whatever degree program. So you have to provide some minimum level of credible quality. Otherwise, you're sunk. So making sure that that happened online, and what does it mean to have quality online, was one big problem that we tried to solve. Ensuring outcomes online. How do you measure outcomes online? It's tough enough to measure outcomes in person. How do you measure it online? So all of that translated from were insights that we had, but you have to completely reinvent the model, because how you teach and how you learn online is completely different. And a lot of people don't recognize that. So they are really trying to replicate the offline on online and think that will work. And it's a completely different model. They don't realize that. So these were all the learnings and the insights that went into building Harappa. I think very quickly what we also realized is that this is the sort of learning from the startup world, and a lot of VCs and others challenged us also, that you can't do B2C and B2B in a startup environment. The entrepreneur in us was like, why can't you? Of course you can. Right? Same thing, same content. Right? Completely different ball game. Yeah. So I think what happened was that the Upgrad acquisition really focused us. Because when Upgrad happened and when they approached us, we were doing everything. And they very quickly, because they came from the B2C background, they very quickly made us see the light of wasting money on performance marketing and the futility of just going after customers and spending money on Facebook and these apps. So I think very quickly that got us focused on the enterprise business, which was, by the way, if you look at it from a strength standpoint, the B2B enterprise business was something that was much stronger. We had built a very strong client base. Yeah. And of course, with corporates, you get repeat buys and so on. So yeah, these were some traditional learnings that came in. I come from a B2B background, so I understood, the consulting based going to companies, convincing them model. So yeah, so that's been the journey. Lots of learnings from the past which needed to be morphed into a new context. Lots of need to create new models, knowing that this is a different context. where there is no learning from the past, and lots of constant adjustments, readjustments, which is a very characteristic of a very high growth startup environment. And then finally, the merits of merging with a larger player where they bring their own insights, they bring their own power, their own credibility and expertise. So all of those things have come together to bring us where we are. It's been actually a fascinating journey. And we feel like, Shreyasi and I often talk about the fact that we've almost seen like everything in this short time span. It's like it has all the ingredients of a thriller movie and a thriller business, all contracted and compressed into a very 5-year time frame.
It was very commendable. I think, again, outside in, it feels like such a roller coaster. And just listening makes me understand the value of like true leverage and true insights, right? Like the fact that you put in the work, across 15 years to understand the different moving parts of different institutions and then adapt and bring in your insights from even before that of leveraging technology, understanding it well, knowing about students just comes in so handy when, replicating and building another institution from scratch. And I also think it's noteworthy to mention that I think your knack for building an institution without you being at the center of it, which is to say that, okay, we'll have somebody else run it and perhaps, own the day-to-day, but you will be playing a crucial role in the inception of it is phenomenally aspirational and inspiring. So lovely to observe that. No, that's lovely. And as I was mentioning, I think it's very noteworthy to see all that you have accomplished across the years. As we conclude, I think one of the things I'm curious to understand, sir, is the fact that it feels like education has a couple of these dichotomies. And you've done a TEDx talk, which is black and white about 7-8 years back. But the fact that sometimes, okay, private and public may not fit together well. Let's say capitalism and philanthropy may not sit together well. Outcomes and learning may not sit together well. There may be trade-offs that you have to choose, and I'm picking up from that talk itself. But have you ever considered how to navigate some of these trade-offs? Or are these trade-offs, because quality and scale also feel like a trade-off? How have you perhaps gone about these decisions?
Yeah, I think instead of being trade-offs, I've always tried to see these as being black and white rather than black or white, which is what that talk was about. And again, it's cute to put it that way, but I think these do create tensions and conflicts. But that's what I think you get paid for, right? Or
to solve for those.
To solve for those. If you're going to do something difficult, if you're going to do something that is enduring, if you're going to build institutions, if you want to do stuff that is distinctive, high quality, stands the test of time, survives beyond you, you have to make sure that those are not trade-offs. And how do you do that together, right? So, and these are, I'm not saying all of these you'll be able to solve for. Sometimes you come across problems that are they're completely intractable.
Yeah.
Can't solve. You'll encounter those. But equally, I think trying to go easy on one a little bit and trying to take advantage of one, and then so you go up in steps, right?
Yeah.
You let go of one trade-off, one side, do the other one, and back and forth. As long as you don't give up completely on one. So quality and scale, for example. Sure. Actually, in educational institutions, both go together. The more scale you have, the more resources you have, you can actually build. But it's equally true that every time you increase scale, quality suffers a little bit. Because suddenly you will have strain on the infrastructure. Suddenly you may be actually getting some students that are not so great. Somebody you hired faculty who are not so great. So then you have to adjust for that. So it happens in stages and steps. But I think as long as you make sure that I have to keep balance. So at the micro level you are trading off, but at the macro level you are moving up together. And that's the way to think about it, I think.
Yeah. And that's where the magic lies, I'm guessing. And that's what's led to such great institutions. For the second last question, sir, I would love to understand this entire reverse brain drain that we're now talking about. The large narrative, as I was saying, has largely been across the years, right? That maybe great education is available outside of India, and that's where a lot of your institutions and collective effort has helped now establish a place where a lot of people want to be back in India, want to either come back, stay back, or build. And in your time frame, you've now seen this evolution of the Indian tech ecosystem, businesses being sprout out. I just want to understand that when somebody is now looking at this trade-off, right? Let's say India versus the US or any other country, how do you think we can evaluate, and what is the India story in your mind? How would you describe it? Is something I would love to hear for aspiring students, aspiring entrepreneurs, folks listening to you.
I think different from when I was growing up, where there was a tendency to just go abroad. Today, the India story is very much part of the global narrative, and the India story is almost the necessary condition for the world to progress and succeed. So if you are an Indian, I think under no circumstances should you lose your connect
To the country.
to the country. And you should definitely understand what is going on in the country and find your own way to be connected, engaged with the country. To me, it matters less whether you go for your undergrad abroad or your master's abroad or your MBA abroad or you go do a PhD or you work abroad. My advice would be don't ever lose your connect because it will be an asset.
Yeah.
It'll be an asset whether you are here all the time and never go abroad,
Or when you come back.
or when you come back, or when you are there. It's okay for you to go live in Germany, but don't lose the India connect. It's okay to go study, but come back and do summer internships. Come back and do an exchange program with Ashoka. Come back and do the Young India Fellowship at Ashoka after your undergrad, because that re-engages you back with India.
Yeah.
So find ways to stay connected. In our days, we used to say, it's okay, yaar. I'm happy where I am. I came back because I was fortunate enough to see the opportunity after liberalization and so on. So I saw the switch. But this generation has to recognize that this is a huge asset. You are born into this asset. You have it as your virasat. Why give it up?
Yeah. No, that's lovely. I think that's so well put. The virasat is ours to lose, and if you're not in touch, you probably just stay away from it to your own fault. So you should stay in touch. That's a lovely insight. Before I go on to the concludatory questions, it's been a pleasure. The standard format is that we'll do a couple of very quick questions,
Sure.
and I'd love to just understand more pointed, perhaps quick answers to them.
Yes.
No conversation with you is complete without mentioning your mentor, whom you speak very highly about, Mr. Rajat Gupta. Just would love to understand your learnings from him. You mentioned it in bits and pieces, but if you had to condense the instrumental role he's played in your life, and you've publicly acknowledged so many times, I would love to hear what those learnings are.
One was just always a commitment to excellence. Second was always aiming high, looking for a big vision, grand vision. It sounds almost pretentious to say that, but it's because you can do it. So why not aim high? Very committed to making a difference, giving back, doing something for the country, doing something for the world. Extremely thoughtful, calm, great listener, and of course, very committed to other people's success, which is what I benefited from.
That's lovely. All golden learnings applicable for so many lives. The other important person that you've spoken about is Mr. Chandra Babu Naidu, and you've spent some instrumental time in making sure the ISB project. You've seen the Microsoft Landmark Research Center at Hyderabad as well. Do any particular anecdotes or learnings come to mind, having observed his trajectory as well? We all saw a couple of months back and weeks back what happened as well. He was instrumental. Any learnings that come to mind?
Never give up. Tenacious, relentless, hugely committed, very strong action bias. fearless and willing to take risks. Uh, Simple formula, I'll give you +1. If somebody gives you X, I'll do X +1. Uh, and just being very inspiring as a politician, as a leader, as a chief minister. So I think, for him, the tenacity, the never giving up, the action bias, and big ideas. Big ideas.
I think the big ideas theme is almost a
Yes.
commonality across.
Yes, I've been very lucky to see that.
in action.
Yeah, because coming from where I grew up, like everyone else, you're modest. You can't think of building a university.
Yeah.
So often people ask me this question, don't you get daunted by the idea of building it? And honestly, it's not like I was born with this, but because of these big inspirational folks that I had the chance to work with, they give me the opportunity to think big.
Yeah. No, that's lovely. You've also seen, Hyderabad and Delhi, as centers of now education sprung up in your time. I don't want to make you choose, but like if you have to just talk about how some of these, centers of excellence are getting built, and we need more of these. We need like
Yeah.
Patna to also become one, a Calcutta to also become one, and perhaps some of these cities, let's say Calcutta's been left behind. I come from that city. I've been born, grown up there.
As is Patna.
Yeah, and how do we navigate perhaps that, or just your thoughts on like having seen Hyderabad and Delhi, what is the replicable factor?
I think the leadership, the one person at the top,
yeah, that has to
the
drive it.
CEO, whether it was Naidu or Sheila Dikshit, and now I think it's really the person at the top. I mean, I've had close interactions with some of these folks, and I've seen that that's what makes the difference. These are people who are very committed. They do their politics, but they do their development and execution.
Awesome. My final question as a part of this series is if you can emphasize the role of people around you, because I think, again, that was a commonality I witnessed, that you've been in elite institutions which transformed to just great company, right? Great people all around you, and you've seen these successful journeys alongside yours building. What is the role of people? I think we sometimes underestimate it, especially as youngsters, where the 5 people around us seems like a phrase that is difficult to, really practice. But what has the role of people been in your life, and how do you consciously develop a deep circle which you respect, learn from, and have fun with?
There's a famous book by Adam Grant at Wharton called Give and Take.
Yeah.
And I think the big thing is that the more you give, the more you get back. There are some people who are just take people, and obviously they aren't the people you want to be around. They aren't the people who inspire you. They aren't the people who help you in the future. And I don't think this is only about giving sacrifices and doing only for other people. I think you should take, willingly take when people offer. But I think being in the give mode when it comes to people really builds the network, builds the relationship. In fact, people take this word and network and make it about networking, and I think it's a very misused word. I think by helping other people, and I don't mean helping in the charitable sense, by just being useful, you build relationships. And those relationships then come back to help you when you need them. And it happens very naturally. People respect you because you made time for them. People respect you because you are committed to their success. Those people then become your pillars when you are building something. Equally, it doesn't always mean that they would be juniors or peers. They could be senior people who you are doing something for. They then support you. They then create opportunities for you. They are the ones who then become your mentors. They look out for you. These are the people you can go for advice when you need it. So to me, it's really about just being in the give and take game and being slightly more on the giving side than the taking side.
Got it. Be a giver, net giver, if you can.
Yeah.
No, awesome. This has been so lovely. I'm really, really grateful for your time, sir. The last question is about the multiple hats you wear, and I would love to understand perhaps just how you look at life. This is a bit on the philosophical side, but to the extent that you can share, because it feels like you've been an academic. You also have a very strong cultural side to you. You are, you've written, you've authored a book. You've also taken your genes, and your grandfathers, forefathers, father have been poets. You also have this teaching side to you. You've, of course, been a phenomenal institutional builder, a consultant. These many different hats just feel like you must be a man of multiple traits. Why is it that you do what you do, and how does that scratch your curiosity? If you could just end with closing thoughts on how you look at life with these multiple hats, I think that'll be lovely.
Oh, you asked the toughest question in the end. I, I just feel very grateful that I have, uh, I am in a world at a time which allows me the privilege of doing all these things. I am privileged with the education I got, the, the upbringing I got, and the opportunities that this country gave me. And I feel that I owe it in some ways to give back whatever I can do. I also feel a little bit jingoistic that, we keep talking about Nalanda and Takshila, and, I lived close to Nalanda and heard about it throughout my life. Why can't we build great institutions? It's about time.
Yeah.
And we can.
Yeah. And we have.
So, well, I think we are not there, but I think that is a very big part. It's not like I have to prove anything to anyone, but it just feels like, oh, come on, we can do this too.
Yeah.
So that's a big driver of what I'm trying to do with the educational institutions, and that will always be a passion, a deep down purpose that drives what I do. But I do feel very strongly about my roots in Bihar and the upbringing I got, and therefore the connection to Hindi and literature. I feel that we have to preserve our languages. I happen to be connected to Hindi, and so I want to do my bit in the next few decades or however long I have to promote that, preserve that. So I think those are some of the thoughts that are going on in my mind at this stage.
Got it. No, we love that, and I think all of us will be waiting for the many more institutions to come with your touch and the lovely things you continue doing. And it's such a big service to the entire country, if I may. Thank you so much. This has been an absolute honor.
No, the privilege is mine. You have a great podcast, and that's so popular. So I'm very privileged that you invited me and you've given me so much time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I hope you had a great conversation.
I had a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. If you made it this far, you've probably watched the entire episode. And if you've done that, I'm really grateful. I and my team try to put in a lot of effort to ensure that we can bring the best quality content to you. So if you liked the episode, if you watched it thus far, my request to you is to share it with people, to subscribe to the channel, and to ensure that we can keep growing. We are everything and anything only because of you, our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll keep bringing to you amazing content. Cheers.